Building a corporate culture means practicing what you preach and having everything you're preaching integrated in every process, everything that you're doing, versus this disconnect between what you're telling people and then what actually happens in the day-to-day. The point is, every interaction, every conversation becomes an opportunity to cast a couple of hooks and then allow the other person to connect the dots for us. And I won't forget the policeman who came to the scene and it was like, oh my God, he's still alive. I mean, we've all been in meetings, right, where there was an unexpected idea, but we didn't raise it because we didn't feel ready or like senior enough or whatever it is. And that's the same with, imagine you're at a conference and there's this amazing speaker and something holds you back from actually speaking with that person. And then you go outside and you think, I should have spoken with that person. One of the things that I found extremely helpful is to reframe it and thinking about what's really the worst thing that can happen. The scariest thing in life when you look back is that you didn't live up to who you could have been.
And that there is a game changer.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Rich in Success podcast, the show that brings you motivation, education, and indeed the inspiration so that you can live a happier, a healthier, a more successful, and a more fulfilling life. Thank you for being back here. As always, my name is Matt Hall, your host, your compere, and today's guest is Mr. Dr. Christian Busch. Now, his latest book is called Connect the Dots, and I think that this is an absolutely fascinating book. Ultimately, that is around looking at good luck, how we can create more good luck, and how we can use the unexpected to actually benefit our lives. Now, Dr. Christian Busch is an expert in the areas of innovation, purpose-driven leadership, and indeed serendipity, and that is the thing that forms the basis of his book, Connect the Dots. Serendipity. I was a little bit like, okay, this is a new subject. When we talk about coaching, when we talk about personal development, we generally put the emphasis on the focus on what we can fully control and disregard the rest. But Dr. Christian Busch has other ideas, and he believes that something we should focus on is creating and responding to more serendipity in our lives. So this is going to be a really, really, really interesting. That was 3 realies. That's how interesting this episode is going to be. It certainly was an interesting conversation for me, and there's certain things that I've taken away from it that has opened my mind. Again, Dr. Christian's whole aim really is to be able to help people live more purposeful, more fulfilling, more successful lives. So the mission is the same, but the research that he's done provides some very, very different perspective on how we can be successful. Dr. Christian Busch is the director of the CGA Global Economy Program at New York University, and he also teaches at the London School of Economics. So this is a well-researched individual that has dedicated most of his life to not only learning the best he can about human beings, but then being able to share what he learns to genuinely create an impact. Enjoy this episode. This is 161. How you can create good luck with Dr. Christian Busch. And just before we dive straight into today's Rich in Success podcast episode, I wanted to share with you what becoming a Rich in Success member could actually do for your life. Now, if you're somebody that is at a point where you're serious about positive change, whether that be in your health, your well-being, your mindset, your business, your career, your finances, or your relationships, the Rich in Success membership is perfect for you. For just £39 a month, you get access to over 40 training videos where I'll be taking you through everything from goal setting. We'll be looking at high performance habits. We'll be looking at different changes you can make to your mindset and your attitude that are going to be able to propel you to have more success in every single area of your life. And in addition to these training videos, every month you will get a live group coaching call with me where you can ask me any questions about the content or about things that you're going through in your life so that I can help you personally as your coach. And as well as that, there will be exclusive bonus interviews with experts in a variety of fields. I'm bringing together the best minds, the best experts from all around the world to give you access to the very best content to help you move forward in your life. All this for just £39 a month, reoccurring subscription that you can cancel at any time. To become a Rich in Success member today, please click the link below or head on over to richinsuccess.com where you can sign up there, and I will look forward to seeing you in the exclusive members area very soon.
Okay, Dr. Christian, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate you. You are currently in New York, so we're doing this on Zoom. Unfortunately, the podcast budget couldn't afford the flight over to New York, so we've got to do it from my office in Bradford, which is not the same. But what I want to say is I'm fascinated to have you on this show. You are an expert in innovation, in leadership, and indeed serendipity. And this is where I want to start today, because for me, this idea of utilizing serendipity and luck, shall we call it, never occurred to me until I discovered this book that you've written, which is Connect the Dots. Because I guess for me, when we're focusing on success and achievement, I always operate from a standpoint of we need to focus on what we can control and the variables that we know are 100% true. So this idea of focusing on luck, or even I always say, things like don't focus on things you can't control, like talent and natural ability and luck. But obviously your research is about how we can utilize good luck, how we can utilize serendipity to live more purposeful, meaningful, successful lives. So talk to me about this concept, and indeed the book, which I have here, Connect the Dots, and how it can help people.
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having me, Matt. It's great to be here. So what I found fascinating about this topic of luck is that usually when we think about luck, we think about blind luck, right? Things that just happen to us, the passive things, to your point, right? As opposed to kind of hard work, right? But then there's this kind of smart luck, right? This kind of serendipity where some people just seem to be a little bit luckier than others. And what I found fascinating in my work as entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, and later in academia as well, is that the most successful, purpose-driven people, they seem to have something in common, which is that they intuitively cultivate serendipity. They seem to have a little bit more luck happen than others. And so I got really fascinated by that question. Is there a science-based framework for that? And then what can we do with this in terms of, practical applications? And so a lot of this work is really around saying, okay, if we look at serendipity as the process of spotting and connecting dots, where, imagine that situation where you are in a coffee shop and you have erratic hand movements like I do, right? You spill a lot of coffee. And so imagine you spill coffee over someone and they look at you slightly annoyedly, but you feel there might be something there. You don't know what it is. You just feel there might be something there. Now you have two options, right? Option number one is you just say, I'm so sorry. You walk outside and you think, what could have happened had I spoken with this person? Option number two, you start a conversation. That person, becomes the love of your life, your co-founder, you name it. The point is our reaction to the unexpected, our seeing the unexpected as an opportunity, essentially then helps us form that unexpected positive outcome. And that's how, up to 50% of innovations and inventions emerge, right? It's something that might go wrong, a mishap or something, Viagra, all those kind of things, right? Something goes wrong in the moment, but then you connect the dots and do something with it. And so a lot of this work is really around saying, how do we create more of those potential positive coincidences? How do we create more dots? But also, how do we learn to connect the dots better so that whenever those moments happen, we make the most out of them?
So I guess the second point you've raised there, it's kind of like bringing into your conscious awareness the idea of how to respond in the moment, regardless of what's happened. How can I make the best opportunity out of this? So I guess that is, listening to a conversation like this, somebody listening to this podcast can think, right, okay, that's an interesting concept. I just need to now think when something happens in the moment. In other words, that hindsight that follows afterwards, why didn't I ask for that person's number? Or what? I need to be more consciously aware of that when it happened. Then there's the other point that you said about actually creating more scenarios for serendipity. How do we go about doing that?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of very simple kind of, strategies such as the hook strategy. The hook strategy is all about saying, what are the couple of themes and interests in my life that I'm excited about at the moment, right? So is that, in this case, for example, to take the serendipity mindset into different curricula around the world? Or is that whatever you're interested in, expanding your business into XYZ different areas, whatever it is, right? And then essentially really kind of trying to seed that into every conversation, into kind of side sentences, right? And the person I learned that from, Ollie Barrett, an amazing entrepreneur in London, if you would ask him the dreaded "what do you do" question, this kind of question we all get at conferences, virtually or not, he wouldn't just say, "I'm a technology entrepreneur." He would say, "I'm a technology entrepreneur, recently read into the philosophy of science, but what I'm really excited about is playing the piano." And so what he's doing here is he's giving you 3 potential hooks where you could be like, "Oh my God, such a coincidence. My sister's teaching on the philosophy of science. You should give a guest lecture. Oh my God, such a coincidence. We are hosting piano sessions. You should stop by." The point is every interaction, every conversation becomes an opportunity to cast a couple of hooks and then allow the other person to connect the dots for us.
Wow, I love that. And that there is a game changer, because actually I think that a lot what you said there about it's that awkward conversation a lot of the time. You feel like, I think for a lot of people, they don't want to oversell themselves and actually feel like they need to put themselves into a box and just give one binary answer, like I'm an entrepreneur or I'm a podcaster or I'm a musician. In actual fact, most of us are multiple things. And what you're saying is the more that you can give, the more that there is that chance encounter option where actually, oh, I'm going to put you in touch with this person, or there's something we could do together. Whereas if you'd have just said entrepreneur, not mentioned the piano, for example, that just might have been a meaningless conversation. So I think hopefully for people listening, that's where the penny drops, and that's where a lot of this book and what your work has been about. I'm interested, where did you stumble across this idea, and where did the research begin?
Yeah. Well, it's been a very serendipitous journey itself. I mean,
Of
I used
course,
to be
of
that
course.
kid. Absolutely. But no, I used to be that kid in high school. I was kicked out of high school, had to repeat a year, extremely reckless lifestyle, transferred this into my driving style, probably held the unofficial world record of how many dustbins and trash cans you can knock over on your way to school when you're driving. And then one day wasn't so lucky anymore, crashed into 4 parked cars, and all cars completely destroyed, including my own. And I won't forget the policeman who came to the scene, and it was like, oh my God, he's still alive. And that idea that I was supposed to be dead, that stuck with me. And I asked myself a lot of questions, like, if I would have died, who would have come to my funeral? Who would have actually cared? Was it all worth it? And at that point, I only had depressing answers. And so it took me on an intense search for meaning. I started reading an amazing book, highly recommended, by the way, for times like these, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is all about how do we find meaning in tough circumstances. And what I realized is, the way I find meaning is in connecting ideas, connecting people. And so I started out, as a community builder, connecting people, then entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, and later went into academia. And on that journey, what I found fascinating is I first thought that serendipity would just be something I intuitively do, right? I have a lot of serendipity in my life. And when we built our first community, of kind of young innovators around the world, serendipity happened everywhere. So we saw it as a serendipity accelerator. But I thought, look, this is something we do because it's fun, but there can't be a science to it. I was like, whatever. And my research was kind of very different. It was about how do you scale social impact? How do you, have a meaningful life and so on. And then it popped up everywhere in our research, like you would see serendipity. And so the fascination really was to say, hey, is there a way to bring that together? What I've seen in my own life work, in my own kind of, the way I found the love of my life, the way I set up my businesses, found my co-founders, but also when I observe this across the world, like that as a pattern, like the story is always very different, but the pattern is always the same. And so that's what I got really fascinated by. And, the book itself was really, I initially wanted to write another book about purpose-driven leadership and impact organizations. And I pitched that book to friends of mine. And they were like, yeah, interesting, but do you have other ideas as well? And so I was like, oh, actually, hey, there's this one kind of red thread that brings it all together, which is serendipity. And so that's how it all came about.
And I believe, was you about 18 when that car crash happened?
Yeah.
So, and also, I remember reading in the book that you had a friend that should have been in the passenger seat. and he almost certainly would have died. And it was just a chance thing that, I think had he left a piece of clothing in a friend's car, so he got in the friend's car instead. And it was literally that split decision that potentially saved his life. How did that make you feel at the time?
Well, it's scary, right? When you think about how quickly you can destroy your own life and someone else's life with one decision. I realize that now. We have a newborn here at home, 4 months old, and you feel there's so many decisions you make, and like, you drop the kid one time and it's over, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like those things where you're like, wow, split seconds that decide the rest of your life. And I think that's kind of something in that moment back there, it was the most intense feeling you can imagine, that you would have almost killed your best friend. Like, I think that's kind of an unimaginable bad feeling. And then you carry that with yourself. And I think one of the things, one of the reasons why that incident kind of helped me turn my life around in that way, in terms of mindset and so, was really around saying, look, like, you have a certain responsibility here. Like, life can be over any day, and you can, either contribute positively to people, or, you can have a very negative effect on people. And so I think that kind of really put me on that kind of trajectory of saying, okay, how can I use the limited time we have here in a meaningful way? And I think if I would run in front of a car tomorrow, I hope that now actually I would think very differently about it. And I actually, it might be interesting for your listeners. One of the things I've always been fascinated by is deathbed regrets. So when you Google deathbed regrets, I think in The Guardian or somewhere, they had this thing where nuns essentially ask people on their deathbed, right? What do you regret? And I've always kind of tried to live after this a little bit of, how do I avoid regretting things? Because, it's always the same stuff people say, right? I regret not having built meaningful relationships. I regret not having lived up to who I could have been, those kind of things. It's never, I wished I had 5 more cars in the garage, or I wished I had been partying 5 more times, right? And so it's really kind of thinking about it and reframing it around, hey, like, what are those kind of things telling us in our life, and where do we get our meaning from? And to be honest, like, that kind of almost death of my friend, like, it made me realize decisions have consequences, and in both the good and the bad.
What are some of the main regrets that you look to avoid now? So obviously, you said there about the regrets of the dying. What are the ones that stand out to you that on a daily basis, or certainly weekly, regular basis, you're consciously taking steps to avoid?
I think, the fascinating thing about fatherhood and parenthood, I guess, in general, is that you feel you have a lot of high stake decisions, right? You have the high stake decision, how you give birth, where you give birth. You have high stake decisions in terms of how, you learn how to kind of, bring up a child that lives in a world that's really tough, right? And how you do that in a way that you can still focus on purpose and career and everything else. And so I think there's a lot of these kind of things where I'm like consistently and consciously thinking about, okay, how do you balance that in meaningful ways? And one of the things that I found extremely helpful is I've been fascinated by this idea of maker versus manager schedule, and this idea of how do you protect time in meaningful ways. So when you're writing a book, or when you're writing a paper, or doing a strategy, or whatever it is, you need uninterrupted time, right? So when you have a baby next to you, or when you have frequent meetings, or just a quick coffee people ask you for, that kind of like, you will never really get something done. And I used to be the kind of person who, I would be very available. And so, people would grab me for a quick coffee and quick this and quick this, and I would enjoy it. But then I would look back on the day and really regret saying, I would be regretful in, I didn't really use my time in the way that actually catered to the energy and really having created something. And so I feel like the biggest shift that I've seen, because I've learned that one of the things I regret the most is not spending time in ways that feel meaningful, is really to say, okay, how can I be fully present with my family at this and this time? And then at this and this time, I'm fully present with writing, and this and this time, and really kind of trying to understand my energy, and based on when the energy is in the day, that's when I focus on the creative parts versus other parts. And so it's really kind of minimizing regret around, when you look back in 10 years, do you feel you really created what you wanted to create, but also spend time meaningfully with the people you really wanted to spend it meaningfully with? I think that's the two things where most of my regrets probably build around. But then third, maybe for your audience, my biggest regrets in life usually come from having worked with the wrong people, and in a way knowing it deep in my gut, but then saying, no, but there's so many perks to doing that, so like, I'll still do it. And then being like, oh shoot, I shouldn't have done that. And so I think it's really that idea, right? That once you're in bed with someone, it's very tough to get out of it. And so I think it's really, my biggest regrets a lot of times come from not having listened to my gut, in the sense of that it tells me something, but then I'm kind of like, yeah, but look, like the brain tells me this and this and this could work. And so I'm a big fan of mature gut feeling, in terms of like listening to the gut, doing as much research as possible, and then double checking the gut, but really kind of also allowing the gut to speak.
It's always right. It's always right. Do you feel like you get that, you're quite successful now at trusting the gut and making quicker decisions? Because so much of what you said speaks to me there. And I think that one of the biggest things that I see time and time again that holds people back, whether it be in relationships, whether it be in jobs, you know, businesses, people know that it's not right, but the fear of leaving and the fear of having to start again is so strong, they just try to make it right. And it sometimes keeps people in a job for 20 years or in a marriage for 20 years. And I think actually if people can hear this conversation and reevaluate, what are the signs that you're feeling right now? What do they tell you? And what's the quickest way to move forward? How do you navigate that for yourself?
You know, it's interesting because I feel, to your point, right? Like people talk a lot about change, innovation, all these things, but nobody really likes it because it brings ambiguity, right? Like nobody really likes the idea of having to look for a new job and then navigating towards that. And then, you know, there's a lot of kind of self-worth attached to these kind of questions and so on, right? So it's tough. And one of the things that I'm a big fan of, just as a side note, is to always thinking in terms of portfolios, in terms of, let's say I work in a bank and I do a job that I really don't enjoy that much, to spend 5% of time just casting a couple of hooks within the bank, right? Oh, I'm really excited about XYZ, seeing if people within the bank might be interested in setting up a project around it, or, you know, volunteering somewhere with a person that inspires us, or something else that allows us to cast a couple of hooks towards the next job. Because it's not about just quitting something and then moving on. That's scary, right? It's about rubber stamping towards something. And I think there's a lot of ways, and we can definitely talk more about this. But I think to your point and the deeper question, I think that's also why we miss a lot of serendipity, right? Because we have these self-limiting constraints and beliefs and biases that hold us back from having more of it. I mean, we've all been in meetings, right, where there was an unexpected idea, but we didn't raise it because we didn't feel ready, or, you know, like senior enough, or whatever it is. And that's the same with, you know, imagine you're at a conference and there's this amazing speaker, and something holds you back from actually speaking with that person. And then you go outside and you think, I should have spoken with that person. One of the things that I found extremely helpful is to reframe it and thinking about what's really the worst thing that can happen here. Is the worst thing really the sting of rejection? So is it that kind of, you know, being the love interest, the speaker, or whatever? I always thought the worst thing that can happen is the rejection, right? The immediate sting of talking with someone, they saying, I'm not interested, or I don't have time for you, or whatever it is. But then I realized, no, that's not the worst thing. The worst thing is the nagging feeling of not knowing what could have happened because you didn't do it. And that's kind of what stays with you for days and days, right? And so it's really kind of, once you reframe that, you realize, oh, actually, I should take more of these things, like, and put myself out there, because the short-term discomfort leads to longer-term relaxation, not relaxation, but at least kind of like the feeling that you lived up to what was possible. And I think that's kind of like, there's this beautiful saying, right, that the scariest thing in life when you look back is that you didn't live up to who you could have been. And I think that's kind of something.
Quick one, if you are somebody who is genuinely serious about achieving more in their life, remember, something that I always say is listening to a podcast is not enough to actually get your results. Yes, it's great for the inspiration, it's great for the motivation, and indeed, it's great for the education. But in order to get real sustainable change in our life, we need to take action. Now, I've made my membership as affordable as possible. It's just £19 to join us for a trial month. And I just wanted to remind you to click the show notes to head on over to sign up today, where you can join us to not only join me every single month for live coaching calls, where I'll be giving you tangible exercises, actions for you to go away and implement, as well as you joining a great community with other like-minded individuals to help hold you accountable. Click the link to sign up today.
A lot of times, right, in those situations, there's potentiality. There's all these things that could happen. but we don't act on it because something holds us back. And so I think working on these underlying things, fear of rejection, imposter syndrome, we all have a little imposter, at least a lot of us have a little imposter there, right? Who's always coming out, but then actually saying, you know what, like this time, not. And I've seen the pattern with you, and this time I'll break out of it. I think that's kind of a big thing for more serendipity to happen.
That is so powerful, because it is, when I think about it, listening to you, one of the biggest driving factors for me is exactly what you said. It's that looking back on my deathbed with the regret I didn't live up to who I could have been with the opportunity of life. And I think this kind of idea of connecting the dots and sort of looking ahead, and I think it's about having that wider perspective of regret and thinking, well, actually, every day I wake up, I've got an opportunity, and I can take it or I can ignore it. And what I'm seeing, the theme that you keep mentioning, ultimately, is it's about looking for opportunity in every conversation, in every scenario, but most importantly, then acting on it. And it's that, I think, that holds a lot of people back. I think a lot of people are not aware, and they just allow life to happen to them rather than seeing it as happening for them. So awareness is key, number one, but then it is building courage through action, through taking more action on the opportunity on a regular basis. So you said there earlier about, as you were studying this more and more, you were seeing similar patterns between those who are more successful and, you know, that are utilizing serendipity. And although there was very different stories, there were similar patterns. I'm wondering, is there more, you know, what are some of those patterns you could share with us?
Yeah, well, one is definitely around, so we, for example, did one study with the world's leading CEOs, you know, of companies like MasterCard and other companies, and try to understand what do they have in common. And what is really that allows them to be so successful. And one of the key themes that comes out of it is really that they're extremely good at having some kind of sense of direction or a curiosity or just something that allows them to connect dots to, right? So something that is a bit of a driving force. And again, people always say, find your passion, everything else. I don't think that's always helpful, right? Like a lot of times we might not have that in life, but we might have a core curiosity or a core theme. And so they're extremely good at having that. And then in a company context, that kind of bigger purpose that people can orient themselves around. But then essentially they're building the unexpected into a plan. So they say, here's an approximate strategy, but I'm already telling you now that the unexpected will happen, and that's part of the plan. And to give you one example, right? Imagine you're a company that produces refrigerators and washing machines. And so your marketing plan says, we will sell XYZ washing machines to people who want to wash their clothes in it. Great. Now imagine what actually happened in real life is you get calls from farmers and they tell you, your crappy washing machine is always breaking down. So you ask them, why is it breaking down? Well, we're trying to wash our potatoes in it. It doesn't seem to work. Now you have two options, right? Option one is you say, our marketing plan says that you have to wash your clothes in there. So let's educate the customer that they wash their clothes in there. Option number two is you say, that's surprising, but there's probably a lot of farmers in the world who might have a similar problem. So why don't we build in a dirt filter and make it a potato washing machine? And that's how serendipitously, by the way, the potato washing machine emerged as one of the key innovations. But the point here is like really kind of seeing that, yes, you can have a certain idea of where you're going, but the unexpected then can become your ally. It can become your ally, and it doesn't have to be a threat to your authority and so on. And so what those leaders do extremely well is that they don't pretend that they have it all figured out. They don't pretend that they can give you a 10-year plan. Nobody would believe that anyways, right? What they do is to say, I'm giving you a sense of direction. And then I need you to also be part of like shaping the strategy along the way. And that allows them to be innovative, but also to build trust with people, because people can see their own life reflected in this and saying, yes, life isn't always a straight line. Life is more like a squiggle, and that's okay. It's a sign of a good corporate culture that you build a culture for cultivating serendipity. And Matt, this is really one of the things, you know, that's at the core of why I'm so excited about this topic. It's both that as individuals, it turns uncertainty and the unexpected from a threat into an ally, but also as a company, then we essentially allow people to say, you know what, we don't have to pretend all the time that we know everything, but actually we're doing what we can in terms of planning and projecting everything else, but also we make the unexpected part of what we're doing here. And then actually it becomes like a really cool thing. And then in the weekly meetings, you know, it can be fun to ask, what surprised you last week? And people then, can react to that and say, oh, it surprised me that people used our washing machine differently. Great, that's our next product, right? And so it's really making small shifts. It's not about changing everything at once. It's about saying, is there one question we can ask in the weekly meeting differently that allows us to have more of this to happen? And by doing that, you legitimize it, you normalize imperfection, and you do that in a way that's actually productive versus counterproductive.
Wow, right, okay, I love this, because when you look at sort of traditional business coaching and teachings, and when people actually look at creating business plans, I think often people focus on looking at it in a linear fashion, doubling turnover or whatever. And it is always about scaling in a logistical manner. When you explain it like that, and when we actually think about it, that sounds absolutely ludicrous, because the reality is uncertainty and life being messy and things not going to plan and projections not being what expected is almost a guarantee. When we start to look at it like what you're saying, ultimately what this whole concept that you've researched in depth is about is using that as part of the plan. Looking at the way that you lead your team, like you just said there perfectly, the questions that you ask is about utilizing this unexpected nature as actually being part of the weekly meeting. And hopefully people are listening to this like, wow, okay, like you said, it's just a simple change. It's a different awareness that can really lead to true greatness. And I think that's an interesting concept, because uncertainty is often associated with massive fear. And I think what you need usually, and I guess what you're saying about the characteristics, the traits, the themes that crop up in successful leaders is they're very at peace with uncertainty. And I think one of the biggest reasons is self-belief. There has to be some level of, it doesn't matter which way this trajectory goes. It doesn't matter what obstacles are thrown. It doesn't matter if it doesn't go the way I expected. I believe in my ability to figure it out. I'm interested, has self-belief always been something you've had? And if somebody struggles with self-belief, have you got advice for them on how they can build genuine belief?
It's interesting because I've been thinking about this a lot also in the context of parenting, for example, right? Because you when you raise a kid, what you want to do is you want to instill self-worth, you want to instill self-belief, you want to make sure that the kid has the feeling that they can achieve everything. And if they don't, that's fine too, because they're worthy, right? And so that they don't attach to particular outcomes or particular plans, but that they're always fine, to your point, right? I think that's the kind of thing that this belief that you'll always be okay. I think that's, and again, I think depending on the context someone is in, that's easier or not easier, right? I think a lot of our work, for example, is in tough, challenging contexts of extreme poverty. It's a very different environment. So I think we also obviously, can never blame anyone for bad luck or things like that. So I think that's extremely important. But to your point, like, in my case, I was very fortunate that my parents were always very focused on, how do you build Christian self-confidence and self-belief and do that. But it's fascinating, because I feel also with those leaders, if it doesn't go hand in hand with a certain humility, then it can guide you into the wrong direction, versus as long as if you're built in a certain humility where you say, yes, I believe in myself, I believe in my project, I'm pitching this, I'm going out there, but at the same time, I'm also open to realizing that my assumptions might partly be wrong, and that's fine. And I think that's, I think a lot of what you said resonates a lot, because it's kind of really the mix, right, between saying, how do you make sure that you somehow portray that confidence that people, a lot of times, right, when people buy an idea, for example, they buy you, right? They buy you and what you portray. And so it's really kind of saying, okay, like there is a certain idea of that self-belief, but at the same time, there's also this kind of humility in there of saying, I haven't have it all figured out, and that's fine. Like that's part of it, right? And I think that's what I've seen in those leaders, that when they speak with their people, they run companies of hundreds of thousands of people. They wouldn't stand in front of people and say, people, I have no idea of anything, because then their authority would be out of the window, right? But they stand there and they say, you know what, hey people, we're so excited about going this direction together, but also, you know what, I don't have it all figured out, and that's fine. And by doing this, by portraying the living reality and this humility, that's where innovation flourishes and everything else. So I'm a big fan of small things, of building this, right? In terms of really kind of in a way thinking about, okay, where do I draw my self-worth from, right? So do I have a more external locus, right, in terms of a lot of my self-worth comes from XYZ people or whatever it is, or is it more internal focus in terms of sense of inner achievement, whatever it is, and then really kind of trying to work around this and say, okay, if I know that a lot of my self-worth comes from people outside, of course I try to, reduce the dependency on that, but also maybe I'm thinking differently about what kind of people I surround myself with. If I'm always surrounded by people who talk me down and who kind of like give me the feeling that I'm not worthy, maybe I should reduce the time hanging out with those people and really focus more on people who lift me up and become part of those kind of communities. And I think one of the beautiful things that, with all the really bad things that the pandemic has brought us, I had severe COVID and others around me. One of the things I feel that's been never easier than before is to plug into different types of communities and really kind of then engage with people who potentially are more aligned also in terms of energy and so on. And so I'm a big fan, Matt, long story short, that I think a lot of self-belief comes with the people we surround ourselves with and that are kind of like part of our team. And I think that is a really conscious decision at some point to say, you know what? I always want to help people. Like I had that interesting conversation a few days ago. Someone asked, like, what do you do with people who are toxic or who kind of like who kind of bring you down all the time and things like that? And I'm always a big fan of giving them a chance first, right? Of saying, okay, let's see if there's something we can do together. Can you try a couple of these serendipity strategies in your life and see how joyful that can be? And kind of really, but then also saying at some point, look, like I just can't do it. And so I have to fade a little bit away from that. And so I'm a big fan of just then kind of spending less and less time and really kind of naturally versus like this kind of severe cut of like and really fading out of these kind of relationships and friendships. And so long story short, I think a lot of the self-belief question to me comes to the communities of practice around us and how we surround ourselves with people who help us build our self-worth versus kind of who constantly bring us down.
And when it comes to, you touched upon there about the people you're surrounded with and the relationships with them and the communities. And I think that's, as we know, such an integral part to building a business and being able to scale and being a strong leader. What would you say are some of the main things to focus on if somebody's maybe quite early on in maybe managing a company or, they're employing people for the first time and they want to cultivate a great culture and build a strong community that is building for success ultimately? What do you think is the most important things they should be focusing on?
Well, one thing I've seen in the companies I was co-founder of or that I've worked with is really kind of the emotional pulse also. I think people are always very focused on kind of aligning on strategy and like figuring out strategy, but the more important thing actually is where are you emotionally? Because a lot of people get burned out very quickly. A lot of people might have a stumbling block and then give up and things like that. And so I'm a big fan of really thinking about how do we build a culture that allows people to check in on different levels, not just professionally, but also saying, hey, look, we're in this together. How do we make sure that we feel each other's temperature from time to time and do that? And we made a big mistake in one of my earlier ventures where we didn't do that. We were so excited about our mission and vision and building things that we completely missed to actually take our emotional temperature. And then after like a couple of years, we realized, oh my God, we really developed apart, like away from each other, because in a way we didn't check in on that part. So I'm a big fan of really trying to figure out, in meetings, for example, to just from time to time, refer to, hey, look, like what's going on in your life at the moment, and how can I be part of helping you in navigating this? Because again, the more we can be part of the whole life of a person, the more we can actually then make also the job part of something they are more excited about. So I think that comes to the. Mm-hmm.
Would you say then it's a case of people first, business second? Like when you work on the person and you make sure that they're in a good space and it's almost their personal development and that kind of nurturing that. Do you think that should be more of a focus and that business is secondary to that?
Well, I see it as both first in the sense of that, like good business is people first, right? In the sense of, if you look at Zappos and all these really good companies, they've always had a focus on how do you make sure that your employees are okay, because that's kind of the main thing that then will get everything else running. I've been doing a lot of work, especially with large companies around, if you're at a company like Danone and you produce yogurt, you go home and you work on your passion project because what do you care about yogurt? But if Danone now works with a social business around eradicating poverty in XYZ countries by using the yogurt actually productively to actually help people live meaningful, good, better lives, then now you don't have to work on your passion project in the evening. You actually channel your energy into the job. And so what happens here is the company becomes so much more productive because people feel it's meaningful work they do. And so I think to me, the biggest, or the one key answer to your question, there's a lot of kind of things we can talk about, right? Like modules of how you build a good corporate culture. But to me, it always comes back to how do people align their own purpose, their own, what feels meaningful to them with what feels meaningful to the company and what the company wants to achieve. And that's really what this is about. If I check in with you about what you're really excited and passionate about, and we align that with what the company does, then it makes it much more likely that I'm with you productively, that I really kind of get excited about everything else. So what we've done a lot with companies there is to say, if you're preaching this whole thing, that you're a family as a company and that you have XYZ purpose, well, where is it in the day-to-day? When I come to the office on Monday morning, do I feel it? Is that part of my KPIs? Is that part of how people get promoted? Is that part of and really integrate it into the day-to-day? And so I think that really comes back to, if you're saying, for example, playfulness is a key value of your company, okay, great, but how do you then practice it? Is that really part of the meetings, or are the meetings stiff and the opposite of playfulness? And I think, the long story short really is that building a corporate culture means practicing what you preach and having everything you're preaching integrated in every process, everything that you're doing, versus this disconnect between what you're telling people and then what actually happens in the day-to-day.
I think that's so powerful what you just said, and it reminds me of a talk that I saw you doing. It's kind of similar and connected to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and how, again, traditional ways of coaching business and looking at business. I think you said something like they look at was it they do well and then do good, or something like that. We need to get profit for ourselves first, and then we can set up foundations and charities. And you were speaking about we should look at the Maslow's needs not so much as a hierarchy and look at it differently. Would you just touch upon that? Because I remember thinking that was such a great point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really, thank you for bringing up. I feel like that's really at the core of a lot of the how I think organizations will flourish, but also more importantly, people will flourish in the future, which is traditionally, both as individuals and as organizations, we've kind of lived along this kind of ladder thinking, right? Like the kind of hierarchy, Maslow hierarchy type thinking, where you first fulfill your material needs and safety needs and the quote unquote lower needs, right? You make a lot of money, all that stuff. And then you give back at some point. Then you kind of do the things that feel really meaningful to you. So someone like Bill Gates would first set up Microsoft, make a lot of money, and then set up a foundation, give it all back, right? So to your point, we would do first well, then do good. And I think that kind of thinking is a lot of times in, yay, I will work in a bank for 4 years where I don't care about what I'm doing. And then afterwards, I'll set up the foundation I really care about. And I think what that does is, the problem is, of course, life is not that way, because you might run in front of a car in 2 years and then what? Then you never had that kind of meaningful impact that you wanted to have. Or, it also kind of leads us to that kind of thinking, to your point, that it's focused on resourcing, right? I do a lot of work in resource constraint contexts where the idea always was, give people money and give them better food and then they'll be fine. No, people locally want to create their own luck. They want to feel that they do something meaningful. And so by just providing resources, you disempower them. And that's the same in a company context. If you just throw money at people, and if you just throw money at problems, people feel disempowered. That might have a short-term spike and yeah, great, everyone likes money, right? But then actually there's no meaning attached to it. And so I think what the bigger implication here is that I think a lot of organizations are realizing we need to do well and good at the same time, and we need to do that in ways that people both feel treated fairly on the money side, and that they can, repay their student debts and all these kind of things, and at the same time feel that they work on something meaningful. And I think that's where a lot of times, we see companies at the moment trying to figure out, right, how do you build more meaningful work type settings? And I think that's exciting, because that gives us a lot of space for a lot of impact.
Absolutely incredible. I'm interested for you personally, obviously, somebody who's researched all these subjects that is ultimately about finding deeper purpose and meaning and, I guess, happiness and a more fulfilling life. Do you have things you picked up along the way that are almost like, I know there's this phrase that's thrown around about like daily non-negotiables and habits, rituals, routines. Is there anything you personally live by that you know you need to stick to? And when you don't, that's where fulfillment starts to dip, maybe confidence starts to dip, things like that.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think, it's hard sometimes, right? Because life, to exactly what we talked about, like life is unpredictable. Things happen, COVID happens, right? And then like it kind of like you try to figure things out. But one thing that I've been very, very conscious about is I'm blocking my mornings usually. Like usually, now I'm on New York time, so kind of like we're in the morning. So that's kind of like, I thought, okay, hey, great. Like I definitely have to talk with Matt. But in general, what I try to do is I'm trying to, in the mornings, really focus on the things that give meaning to me, in the sense of, at the moment, it's really kind of how do we think about the content we work on and take that into different curricula and organizations and everything else. And what can I do around this to really make that happen? And so when that doesn't happen, then I feel a little bit like, oh, something's missing of the day. The same then, how do I make sure that I check in with my family and have that kind of daily hour in the evening or so to really kind of reconnect like more meaningfully versus like during the day, the back and forth things. And so I think it's interesting because I used to be the kind of person who loved to have different projects and portfolios and run with those different things. But then when thinking about what really gives meaning, it's really that kind of like one broader, hey, look, this is what I'm working towards. And then really kind of making sure that that time is protected in some way. And I think that's now the kind of thing. But again, I think with a kid, that's the fascinating thing, right? How you're trying to, I was very scared, by the way, about the question of, would raising a child take away from ambition and purpose in terms of other things, right? I was like, oh my God, like will I now be so focused on the kid that like all these things, and I love my kid dearly, and she's the most amazing human, of course, in the universe. Like everyone says it, but I think she truly is amazing. But it didn't, and it actually just reinforced to say, hey, like more than ever now, I want a world that she can live in that actually is a world that's worth living in. I think that's a lot of what that work is about. So long story short, I think I get a lot of meaning from both kind of the private and the professional life at the moment, but I'm trying to somehow merge them, but also protect the individual times for it.
And I think that's just about being intentional, isn't it? About having clear understanding, clear boundaries, and then also with the awareness comes back to again of the unexpected. Not every day is going to be perfect, not everything's going to go to plan, but being at ease and seeing the opportunity in that, which I think is the really, really exciting part about what the book's about, and also what we've talked about today. Dr. Christian, thank you so much. There's so much you said that I relate to. There's so much that I know will be really, really interesting for people to consider that perhaps they've never even thought about in this way. Thank you. I think the work you're doing is so important, and I wish you all the best with the continual work that you do, both in business and inspiring and helping others, but also as a father, as I'm sure that is above everything the hardest, most challenging and most unexpected work you've ever done. Thank you so much. This has been a truly amazing conversation. For those that have maybe just been introduced to you for the first time, that want to see more of your work and learn more about what you do, where can they find you, and how can they get hold of your latest book, Connect the Dots? Yeah, and thank you. I mean, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks so much for having me. And so on Twitter, I'm at Chris Serendip. The book Connect the Dots is everywhere where books are being sold. And the serendipitymindset.com is the homepage where a lot of my work is being aggregated. Brilliant. And we'll put that in the show notes. Just before we finish the episode, as always, the final question that I ask to all guests, Dr. Christian, what is your current definition of success? It comes back to what we talked about earlier, that deathbed regret things and thinking about
what does a meaningful life mean, and how can I make sure that I, in the day-to-day, live up to it, so that there's no kind of, in 50 years from now, I want to be successful and I'm building towards this. No, I want to be in the day-to-day feeling that I live meaningfully around all the things we talked about. And as long as I do that, I feel that's success to me. But it's been changing. I feel I love that question, because I think every 3-4 years I would probably give you a slightly different answer in terms of like how success has been changing in the way I perceive the world, and in terms of, success to me, like in the bigger picture, means how do you create a world that's worth living in, right? I think that will probably be more and more now with a kid growing up, that I feel like that will become like an even bigger focus. So I think we should check in from time to time, and the definition probably is changing quite a bit.
Amazing. Dr. Christian, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So there we go. Massive thank you to Dr. Christian for an incredible conversation. I know that I found it really, really interesting and indeed inspiring, and I hope that you have too. Just to let you know very quickly before we finish, that this year marks 3 years since we started the Rich in Success podcast. Now, some of you that have been along for the ride since day one will remember that when we hit our 1 year anniversary, we went ahead to break 2 world records. But now we want to beat it. Now we want to top that. Now we want this year to be bigger and better as we hit 3 years. But for this one, we need your help. We want to know, what do you think we should be doing to mark 3 years of Rich in Success? If you want to suggest your ideas, please email us at richinsuccesspodcast@gmail.com, and I'll look forward to hearing from you. And also, I do just want to let you know that we have got some huge things planned in 2022 to really build on the success of this podcast and continue to deliver more value than ever before. So do make sure you've hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you listen to us on. Make sure that you keep on coming back, as I promise you, we're going to be continuing to really give you genuine education, motivation and inspiration to actually make those huge changes in your life so you can live happier, healthier, more successful and more fulfilled. Don't forget as well, if you want to join our membership so that you can have access to exclusive additional bonus interviews, as well as over 50 training videos that take you through many different concepts and exercises, and indeed coaching models to help you live at a higher level, to help you with your mindset, to help you live a more high performance life, head on over to richinsuccess.com to sign up today, or click the link in the show notes. I'll see you in there, and I will also look forward to seeing you on the next episode of this podcast as the journey of self-discovery and personal growth continues. I'll see you then.